and Jane is one of our awesome instructors who we hope to have back with us in real life soon, but we've got her on Zoom for now, and everybody can give her some snaps because she just got into a PhD program, and so we're really proud of her over here
like
at
just
Broadreach.
now.
Yeah,
Just
so we're
happened.
super, super excited for you. Tell
Thank
us
you.
a little bit more about yourself and what we're going to learn about tonight.
Yes, definitely, I will. So we're going to be talking about plastics, but I just wanted to start by introducing myself and a little bit about where I'm from as well. Now, I will let you know, I'm kind of ADHD, although actually ADHD, so I have a bit of a hard time getting off something I'm really into. So I will check in the chats, but I get a bit distracted. So yeah, raise your hand, and Virginia is going to be helping me here as well. You're welcome to ask questions as we go along, but if it's a big one, let's hang on to it to the end and we can have a big discussion. So firstly, a bit about me. I am a marine ecologist and I work for Broadreach. I've been in the Bahamas and the Caribbean and Fiji teaching marine science and shark studies. And when I'm not doing that, let's double check that this works. I am also a polar ecologist. So I do a lot of work with tourism in remote areas, mostly Antarctica and the high Arctic, but a few other hard to get to places around the world as well. And it's still a little bit like Broadreach for adults, except they don't have to do exams and they don't get to dive, so it's not quite as much fun. But yeah, I do a lot of work in Antarctica because that's a big part of my focus and my background. I'm kind of trying to convince Broadreach to do a program in Antarctica and say it on the internet. So now I sort of put them on the spot, but that's okay. And I am from Australia. I'm from a place called the Hunter Valley. I live out in the country. It's a really beautiful place. And I just wanted to tell you, I'm going to try not to get too into this because I'm really excited about where I'm from. Because of coronavirus, Australia is locked down, so no one out and no one in. So it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, I can't do any of this fun stuff, but on the other hand, I get to really appreciate where I'm from. So I am from a place called Mulbring, and is my computer working? Yes, it is. So we are defined by the Hunter River, which is a huge, well, the river itself is not that big, especially not compared to what you have in North America, because we just don't get the same amount of rain. But it's a huge catchment area, like 8,500 square miles. I live about 100 miles north from Sydney, and up in the upper reaches of the catchment area, like here, this is maybe an hour and a half drive from where I live. It's kind of subalpine, and everything in Australia just like looks different. You know, we have very specific species, so it all kind of like looks different from what you're used to. So right up at the top of the watershed, we get these little tributaries and streams and kind of like temperate rainforest, which is really beautiful. The river itself is really important for the agriculture and the economy of the region. Agriculture is huge in the Hunter Valley. There's three things we do in the Hunter Valley: coal mining, agriculture, which is mostly cattle, so dairy cattle, beef cattle, and thoroughbred racehorses. We're a little bit like Kentucky. We're one of those big focus areas of of thoroughbred racehorses around the world, and wine. So I live basically in the middle of the Hunter Valley Vineyards region. It's really pretty. You guys are a little bit young for it, but when you grow up, you can appreciate it. It's a good place to be. And then I'm not too far from the nearest city, which is Newcastle. It's on the mouth of the Hunter River where it meets the ocean. And it's kind of overlooked a bit because it's an old steel town. It's a huge port. An extraordinary amount of coal and other materials get exported out of Newcastle and imported. So it's sort of a bit like Pittsburgh. It's kind of overlooked a little bit, but it's really beautiful. It's right on the coast. The city is not too big. The whole kind of area is about 700,000 people. And there's really good surfing. We've got lots of marine mammals. We've got lots of coastal dolphins. We have really important wetland areas in the estuary. We've got I just discovered this. We've got a big blue carbon initiative going on in one of the coastal wetlands here in Newcastle, which is part of the IUCN. So that's kind of a big deal, something I need to find out more about. Because of these important estuary areas, it's also a great white shark nursery area, which is kind of cool. And we get a lot of sand tigers as well. So we call them grey nurse sharks. You guys call them sand tigers. And they're critically endangered along this part of the coast, but we get big aggregations here. So they look a bit scary, but those sort of pointy teeth are for eating fish. And you can actually dive with aggregations of dozens and dozens of these sharks just off the coast of Newcastle. And we get humpback whales as well. So the east coast of Australian population of humpback whales that come up from Antarctica, they go up to the reef, which is a lot further north from where I am, and they have their babies there. But they're just coming back so strong. It's a huge positive conservation story where when you put in place good conservation initiatives, then you can really save nature and ecosystems. And this year, there's just been so many whales, and they've been so playful. And occasionally, very, very occasionally, although I haven't seen one around here, we do get killer whales. And that is actually going to be the topic of my PhD study. I'll be looking at the ecology of killer whales off the coast of Eastern Australia. And this I'm definitely not going to talk about because I will never shut up. So let's get to our actual topic, which is plastic. What plastic is, how it impacts on our water systems, on your water systems, and what you can do to help. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because it is relevant to everybody everywhere. I think it's really wonderful that Broadreach is doing these series about your backyard water systems. And even if you live in, Phoenix or Tucson, Arizona, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of your actual town, or in North Carolina, you might not be so close to the coast, but you are definitely connected to every ocean on the planet through your water systems in your backyard. And I really encourage you to go out and explore them. So let's start with the basics. What is plastic? It's a word that we say all the time, and every time you pick something up, you can say, okay, well, this is plastic or it's not plastic, but what is it? Well, in fact, it's actually a large number of different materials. And the one thing that they have in common is that they're all synthetic polymers. Now, synthetic means that it's been made by a person, so synthesized in a lab. And polymer just means that it's a molecule, a very long molecule that's made up of lots of repeating units. So you've got a base unit, or maybe several base units, and they repeat multiple times to make a very long molecule. That's a polymer. And lots of natural polymers exist. For example, DNA is an example of a polymer. Latex, or natural rubber that comes from the rubber tree, the first type of rubber that we use, that's a natural polymer. Spiderweb is another example, that's a natural polymer. So you're probably getting the idea that a lot of these polymers are pretty remarkable types of molecules, which they often have some very interesting properties. But synthetic polymers, plastic, the first plastic came about in 1907 with this guy. This is Leo Baekeland. Now, he was an American Belgian scientist, and he created the first plastic, what we know as plastic. That was called Bakelite. So if you've ever seen any of these kind of old-timey items like phones and radios, and there's like a lot of jewelry in the 70s, there's a lot of kind of kitsch jewelry from the 70s, made out of this pretty like hard but sort of like tortoiseshell-y type plastic. Well, that was Bakelite. And Bakelite was lightweight. Even though it was lightweight, it's very strong. It was very durable. It could be manufactured instead of harvested or grown. So if you needed it, you just made it. You didn't have to plant a field, or you didn't have to catch whales. And it was an important replacement for ivory. So Bakelite at the time was a miracle. It just solved all of these problems for mankind, and also for nature. It was very, very important for the conservation of large animals like elephants and like whales that were used for their bones and their teeth. But nowadays we have all sorts of different materials that are plastic. So plastic is just like a catch-all term for all of these different chemicals. But they have one thing in common, which is that they are synthetic polymers. And then the other thing they almost all have in common is that they are made from either fossil fuels, whatever you want to call them, fossil fuels, hydrocarbons, petrochemicals, petroleum, basically, oil and gas. That's the base material that's used, and then other things are added to them through different processes to make one of a series of different types of plastic. So I'm sure most of you have seen these little symbols here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but this little one in what looks like a recycling symbol, that's actually not a recycling symbol. It's just a symbol to delineate certain types of plastic. So there's 7 of these. Some of them are recyclable, some of them aren't. And to some extent, it depends on what your local council or your local municipality has in terms of recycling possibilities. So the first one is PET. That's your classic bottles. So Coke bottles, that kind of thing. I'm sure you've heard of PET bottles before. High density polyethylene. So anything that needs a little bit more weight to it, like just bigger bottles, milk bottles are all high density polyethylene. Any like big plastic stuff. So plastic tubs and, like kids equipment, anything that's a big hard bit of plastic, it's probably going to be high density polyethylene. PVC, otherwise known as vinyl. So of course our vinyl records are absolutely necessary. They are and always have been made out of PVC. Polypipe is PVC piping. So all of the piping in your house is probably all made of polypipe. And pleather, anything like vinyl clothing. I'm making no comment about whether or not this is, you know, a tasteful fashion decision, but it's made out of PVC. So anything that is like plastic or fake leather. Then we've got low density polyethylene. So same base structure, same monomer, but then made up into a polymer with a different structure. So these are all of our wrapping. Plastic bags that you get at the supermarket, the shrink wrap around everything, just a lot of packaging. That's all low density polyethylene. Polypropylene, a lot of these little sort of sandwich containers, and I'm sure you're seeing a theme here in terms of food and food storage and wrapping. We've got styrofoam as well. These luckily are not too common anymore, but it does vary sort of state by state and country by country. You know, the old school like coffee cup, like the Dunkin' Donut style, and you can kind of break it apart. There's a lot of really nasty chemicals that go into this one, and it can't be recycled, and it lasts forever, and it breaks down, and styrofoam's a really bad time. So we can talk about that a little bit later. And then number 7, the category is just everything else. So all of the other plastics. Bakelite isn't made anymore because it's been replaced by these more technological, or, you know, better plastics that have come along with better technology, but it would go in here too. So nylon, like the nylon that makes polyester for most of your clothing, if it's not made from natural fibers, it's made from plastic. Polyurethane is rubber. So everything in your sneakers or sponges, that's all going to be polyurethane. Cellulose acetate, that is cigarette filters. Now, I hope none of you are smokers, but I'm sure you all know some. A lot of people think that the filter in the little orange bit of a cigarette is plant material or biodegradable. It's not, it's plastic. And for whatever reason, it's just that one thing people just like flick it in the street, straight into the stormwater drain. I used to live in New York, and a friend of mine who was a smoker there was, you know, an intelligent, engaged person, and would never, you know, just drop litter on the street, but he'd flick his cigarettes into the stormwater drain, and I'd hit the roof every time I saw it. You know, he was complaining to me about the state of the East River like that day, and it just goes into the drain and straight into the river, out into the ocean. So for whatever reason, cigarette butts are still treated that way. And then nitrile rubber, just almost everything is made out of plastic. So I'd like you to just take a little second here and just look around you, just pick something up, anything, doesn't matter what it is. My question for you is this: is it plastic? I'm holding a glass of water here. It's plastic. I've got my blue light glasses here, plastic here, and actually this is plastic too. I think this one is polyurethane maybe. Anyway, what else have I got? I've got even my books here in the background. Yep. Grab this one because it makes me look smart. I was going to grab something a lot sillier. Okay, all made of paper, right? Even this cover, all of this painting, all of this cover has a thin layer of plastic over the top of it. Even paints, the paints that we put on our walls, it's all made of PVC. So there is actually plastic everywhere. Now, obviously, it's fundamentally important to how we live. If we didn't have plastic, we wouldn't be able to transport food around the world. We wouldn't be able to keep things fresh and healthy for longer. We wouldn't be able to have as many like reusable things for hospitals and medical reasons, which are really fundamentally important to our quality of life. And they're lightweight, so they don't cost as much in terms of money or even carbon in terms of transporting things. We don't have to grow stuff, so we can like reduce our impact on agriculture. We don't need ivory, all those things. So what's the problem? Well, there's just a lot of it. That's the issue. So we know it's durable, we know it's lightweight, and we know it's strong, which is wonderful. That's why it's so important to us. But it also means it doesn't break down. Now, I'm sure you've heard the term biodegradable before and degradable. You should just know that those aren't the same thing. Degrading just means something is like breaking apart. Plastic breaks apart, it does degrade, especially with UV light that comes from the sun and in ocean water with the salt. So I'm sure you've all seen some like old bit of plastic that's kind of all like gets that like white stuff on top you can kind of scratch off, or, you know, it gets really brittle and breaks easily. That's degrading, but it's not biodegrading because the chemicals are, well, not just because they're based on petrochemicals, But just because of the nature of the chemicals that make up plastic and the way they're made, they don't break down into something that is biologically inert. So you could take a banana skin and throw it away, and it'll be gross. Like, you'll still have like a problem with waste there if you just fill your backyard with banana skins. But eventually they will break down and they will turn back into soil, and they can be reused by plants and animals. That's not the case with the plastics, at least not the plastics that we're using at the moment. And the other thing is, we make a lot of it. So not only do we have a lot of it, we make a lot of it. And every year we're making more and more and more, because our demands, our lifestyle is increasing all the time. So one of the problems with this is that it does get into the ocean. So whether you live inland or not, it's going to be traveling throughout your water systems. Whether it's in the freshwater environment, although we don't tend to think so much about lakes and rivers having a plastic problem, they absolutely do. It's just that the ocean is so much bigger, and so much of the world's plastic does go into the ocean. Obviously, animals don't know the difference. They don't know that we created this thing called plastic, and that it doesn't break down and it isn't edible. We know not to eat plastic, but they don't. And something like a plastic bag in water looks a lot like a jellyfish for, say, a hawksbill turtle that eats jellyfish. And then there's just a lot of problems with entanglement. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen some crazy pictures of animals getting sort of caught in this and caught in that. As somebody who spends a lot of time on the water and spends a lot of time in remote places that shouldn't have, or you wouldn't expect to have rubbish like this kind of thing is common. And this was probably one of the few images I actually felt comfortable sharing. It's really hard, like, seeing images like this. An animal gets caught, maybe tries to eat something, whatever, and then it grows into whatever it's caught in. So this will just slowly slice through this animal's skin as he continues to grow. Depending on how he's caught, like, it might stop him from being able to eat, in which case he'll starve to death, or it will just like slowly cut until it cuts through something critical and he'll die from a horrible injury. Like, it's really, really hard to see. And regardless of like the sort of overall global impact, I would argue just ethically, this is something that we need to be aware of. But unfortunately, the problem is so big that this is kind of a side issue. Of course, for a lot of birds, because these things are lightweight, they tend to float. Not always, but usually plastics float. And so things that are kind of floating around at the top of the water, or sort of like, mid-water column, that's how their prey behaves. So they pick things up. And because this plastic can't be broken down by the stomach either, they just sit there. And so this stomach will fill with plastic, not giving any nutritional benefit, obviously, but also just preventing the animal from being able to fit actual food in there. So these poor animals, whether they're whales or seabirds or fish, will starve to death with a feeling of a full stomach. It's, again, really hard to see. It's common as well nowadays. Every time something washes up, on a beach somewhere, a team of scientists go out and find out everything they can about it. And one of the things that's becoming common is that, whales and dolphins and fish and sharks all have this big load of plastic in their stomachs. Now, most of them can cope with some. A lot of animals do have hard parts, like squids have really like hard little beaks. And so there is like an ability for an animal to be able to cope with a little bit of plastic, but just not this quantity. Now we move on to kind of the smaller and the kind of more insidious problem, which are microplastics. Now, I'm sure everybody's heard this term before, but it's not often explained exactly what microplastics are. Well, first of all, just plastics, all the different types of plastics that we mentioned before, just small. So microplastics refers to ones that are kind of about the size of a sesame seed. And once they start getting broken down even smaller, then they're usually called nanoplastics. But microplastics and nanoplastics, they're just kind of terms that help us kind of think about different sizes. It's all the same issues, but they behave differently in the environment. So an old bucket, for example, which is going to be high density polyurethane, floating around, whether down in a lake or down the creek and in the ocean, it's going to get broken down by that UV, by the sunlight, and just break up into smaller and smaller pieces until you get down to microplastics. And one of the huge issues with microplastics is not so much ingestion or entanglement, like with the bigger pieces, but that it gets into the food chain. So for example, we take our little, I should have said as well, not only are these plastics, whether they're big or small, releasing as they break down, they're releasing a lot of the chemicals that they're made from and that were put into them in order to make these different types. There's all sorts of unpleasant chemicals in there, which are fine when the plastics are, new and they're not degrading. But when they are breaking down, they release a lot of nasty things that you just don't want in your bloodstream. But on top of that, they also have this mechanism of binding with toxins, pollutants that exist in the water already. Now, we humans have done a lot of silly things, especially over the 19th and 20th century, which at the time we didn't know was silly, but we know now. And there are a lot of things out there that we call persistent organic pollutants. So persistent meaning they don't go away. Mercury and all sorts of industrial chemicals that were run off processes that how we used to behave in the past, and for the most part have outlawed now, but that still exists to some extent. Most of these chemicals, these industrial pollutants, are what we call hydrophobic. Now that means they don't mix well with water, so they need to kind of stick onto something or other. Kind of how oil works. That's why you use detergent to get oil off something when you're cleaning things. Oil doesn't mix well with water, but it will stick to anything in that water. So if it were something like a bit of sediment or it's coming out of a river, it'll stick to that. And because that's heavy, it'll take it down to the bottom. So we still have a problem with pollutants without plastic, but they tend to kind of get cleaned up a little bit more by like natural particles. But plastics float. So not only will these persistent organic pollutants, or POPs as they're known, not only will they bind the plastic, but they often have quite like, intricate little surfaces, so they will bind a lot, and then they float, which means that they stay in circulation for the food chain. Now, if we take our little bits of plastic and we think, okay, well, what is going to eat a tiny little bit of plastic? Just like a sea turtle can mistake a plastic bag for a jellyfish, copepods, which are, for example, a little little marine animal, little plankton. Plankter is actually the singular, not that that's important, but a little type of zooplankton. Now, they will mistake a little particle for food, because that's what they do, is they just swim through the water and eat little bits of food. Just to take a little side note here, I don't know if you can see this, but copepods, which are just an example of zooplankton and one of the most common groups of zooplankton all around the world, they are little crustaceans like crabs, and they've got 2 antennae and a little body and 1 big eye. So if that sounds familiar, that is because plankton from SpongeBob is a copepod. But we know, of course, there's not just one plankton in the ocean, there's lots. And I'm sorry I didn't have all of his hillbilly family to put in. Should have taken a bit more time to make that. But the point is, we have lots of zooplankton out there, and they will all be sort of just absorbing little bits of plastic as well as food. But then what happens is, and of course we know we've got this pollutant issue, both from the plastic itself and from all of these organic chemicals, all these persistent pollutants that are bound to little bits of plastic. Then we've got the things that eat the plankton. So the fish eat the plankton, but the fish don't eat one plankton. They need more, just like you. You don't eat one apple, you need more. You're a bigger animal, you need more food than that. But because these pollutants and these toxins aren't really able to be metabolized at all or very well, they just kind of carry on up the food chain. So you get one from each thing that you eat. And then obviously we've got the fish eaters, so seals, for example. And again, they're taking on the load of each one of those fish. And by the time you get up to the top of the food chain, you've got a pretty high toxin load, because this is getting accumulated over time and magnified. So this is called biomagnification. And microplastics and nanoplastics are a huge vector, a huge, vehicle for these toxins. Not only a source of them themselves, but also a vehicle for other toxins to magnify up the food chain. Now, the bad news about this is that we also are marine predators. We might not eat seals, but we do eat fish. And the fish that we like to eat tend to be things like swordfish, salmon, tuna. The tastiest fish, they're very high up on the food chain. Now, I've only got a handful of little steps here, but if I were to do it properly, there might be a dozen steps in here before you get to the final predator. And at each point, we're seeing accumulation of these toxins over time, plus magnification up the food chain. One source of microplastics is actually from microbeads. So they're little tiny bits of plastic that are intentionally put into things as an abrasive or as an exfoliant. So a lot of hand creams and cosmetics and things. Now, I'm very happy to say that in 2016, then President Obama actually signed a bill into law that banned those from being sold in the United States, which is fabulous. So congratulations for that. But it's something to be aware of. China is talking about also banning these, but it still happens all around the world. These huge companies that own everything that we all use, they are using microplastics in other places where the laws and the regulations allow them to do that. So that's just cutting out the whole process and just adding microplastics straight into the water column. So here's the question. Where does it all come from? Where is all the plastic that's building up? You know, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, everything we see on the beaches, where does it all come from? Well, let's look at our usage. By industrial sector, by looking at the uses of these plastics, not the type necessarily, and they're not all the same, you know, some are worse than others, but none of them are good, and that's what makes them all plastics together. The vast majority is coming from packaging. And if you think about your own life, going to the supermarket, even over this next day or two, just start paying attention to the amount of packaging, remembering that even cardboard packaging usually has like a little thin layer of plastic over the top in order to give that sort of shiny, you know, exciting look. Building and construction is a huge one as well. Textiles. We are so reliant on polyester clothing, and we have a globalized economy where we tend to buy things really cheap. You know, you can buy things from, you know, from Walmart or from wherever you can buy a t-shirt for $5, you know, and you know it's not going to last very long because how could it? But we have this huge wastage problem in terms of our textiles. So although we do have lots of areas in which we could improve, I would argue if you cut out the big ones, you make a big change, let's say in the big areas, you can have a big impact on the problem. So I think we should start with packaging and textiles. That's my thought, but I'll leave you to think about that a little bit more. And just remember about how all of our systems are connected. You know, we talk about being in Australia or New Jersey or, you know, Montreal or Arizona, but we all are connected to the ocean and we all are connected to each other because nature doesn't look at our boundaries. You know, you might have a hard time saying like, where is the state boundary on this map? And what we're looking at here are actually all of the major river catchments of the United States. This big pink one in the middle here, this is all the Mississippi. And I have to admit, I'm sorry, I don't know all the other ones, but there's a lot of, even right in the very center, you're still connected to the Gulf of Mexico via the Mississippi River. Beautiful, isn't it? But what you can't see here, apart from at the north and south, are the borders. So nature doesn't care about our borders. We need to think that everything is connected in one way or another. And it is true that a huge amount of plastic comes from Asia. So you may have seen before some graphs that show the input from rivers, different rivers around the world, the amount of plastic that goes into the ocean. This, if you can't tell, I actually think it's an estuary rather than a river, but this is water all through the center there, completely and utterly covered in plastic. I have done a bit of work in Cambodia, and although it's not quite this bad, it's not too far off. But really what we're doing here is sort of shifting the blame and saying, well, Asia's got, you know, the top 10 rivers of plastic pollution, of which I think 7 are in Asia and 3 are in Africa. They together put more plastic into the oceans than all of the other rivers on the planet combined. That's true. However, why? What's happening? And how do we help? Is it good enough just to say, oh, well, that's their problem? Because it's not their problem, it's our problem as well. We're the ones who have to deal with it. I think it's really important to remember, again, how everything is connected. A very interesting paper that was published in Science Advances just about a week ago was looking at the contribution of the United States to plastic waste. And they went a little bit deeper and sort of, you know, readjusted some estimates and more modern, and actually found that the US is actually #1 ranked in the world for plastic waste generation. One of the reasons, not the only reason, this is not to let anybody off the hook, but one of the reasons there is so much plastic waste in Asia is because our countries, Australia, Canada, and the United States, all export rubbish to these countries. So even when things go to recycling, very often, sometimes they do, and often they do, or sometimes they do, you know, in our home countries, but often they don't. And they're sent to China, or they're sent to Thailand, or they're sent to India. And once there, they're not necessarily recycled at all. So there actually is a huge problem when it comes to things happening like we say they're supposed to happen. It's called mismanagement. I would argue it's fraud, but it's fraud at an international level. And we know about it. So we can't just say, oh, well, they're supposed to. We know that it's not happening. And China has been talking about banning all imports of rubbish. So it's going to become our problem very, very quickly. We also need to remember as well, there's a lot of rubbish that is just illegally dumped. So there's littering, just throwing something on the ground, and there's just mismanagement of waste and illegally dumping as well. These are really big issues, and it's hard to see how we fit into that. But I think the first step is just knowing what's actually going on and how these processes work. So here it is, the $94 million question. What do we do? Well, I've already said I think that we should start with the big categories, but we can actually break this down very, very simply. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Remember that one? It used to be really like cool back in the 90s. You guys are probably born in the 90s, but it used to be like really cool, and it kind of like lost traction somewhere along the way. In this order: reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycling is flawed. It doesn't mean there is no place for it, but the way that we currently do it is hugely problematic. But those first two are really, really valuable. And then there's one more for the new century: replace. Reduce, reuse, recycle, replace. So what can we replace with something that is non-plastic? Or what can we replace? What plastics can we make that aren't as toxic and can biodegrade? Is that something we can do? First of all, go get yourself some cute little reusable cups. Think about it. What are you using single use? Bearing in mind that most of the plastic that we throw away, most of it is designed to be thrown away after one use. It's come on a boat from China to be used here, to be thrown away, to blow away on the back of the truck, to come off the landfill, to enter the river, to flow down, maybe to get caught expensively by some, local cleanup organization, to be put back into recycling, to be sold, to be sent to China or India, to not be properly managed anyway. So what are we using that we can replace, that we can, especially single use? Where can we make these big changes? And what is available in terms of what are called bioplastics or green plastics? Here is the thing about this. There's a lot of positivity about this, and there's a lot of negativity about this, and both are reasonable. You'll often hear that degradable plastic bags are not biodegradable. That's true. There was like a brief period there, maybe about sort of 5 years ago, I'm not sure what it's like in America now, where they would make these bags that would actually just disintegrate after about a month. In that case, those bags are just plastic and they're just breaking down into microplastics faster. So that's not a solution. But there are clever people who are doing all sorts of interesting things with making plastics, making materials that are synthetic polymers that are not based on petrochemicals and do not have the same, like toxic ingredients that go into the manufacturer, that can biodegrade. It is possible. Now, I'm no expert on this. I'm no engineer. So I'm going to leave it up to you to go out and find out what is out there. I will warn you, be careful of greenwashing. Greenwashing is this idea where, it comes from the idea of a company like making a billboard that's like green instead of red, and then everybody thinks that it's got something to do with the environment. There's a lot of stuff out there that's just marketing. So do your research, find out like what types of plastics, what types of bioplastics are compostable or recyclable. Can they be recycled in your town? If not, why not? Can you talk to people about getting something going at your school? Where are you involved? Like, what can be replaced? What can be reused? What can be refused? What can you say, no, thank you, we don't need to do that anymore? Have a little look about the areas in which you are involved. Because here's the thing, there's nearly 8 billion people on the planet, and we all want to have a good standard of life. And at the moment, you cannot have a good standard of life without plastic being everywhere, absolutely everywhere. All of us right now have plastic everywhere. So how are we going to make a change if we're just like 1/8 billionth of an effort? Well, the solution is this is what I want you all to do about everything you care about. Think global, act local. It might feel like you're only a little drop in a bucket, but what is the ocean but an accumulation of drops? So you need to get involved with what you do and where you are and who you know, and use your networks, because people care about this. People care a lot about this. Even for me, it took a long time for me to be able to write this lecture because it's so depressing. But there are solutions. There are ways that we can move forward. And I think when it comes to this idea of bioplastics, for me, that's something I find really exciting. I don't know enough about it to know what the solutions will be, But what I do know is we are very clever little monkeys. When we get together and decide to do stuff and decide to study and decide to collaborate, we can make things happen really, really quickly. I usually look to the examples of the wars for this. I'm sure most of you have studied history and you would know that of all of the horrible, horrible things that came out of the wars, we still have had huge technological advancements in each one of those big wars that our countries were involved in. The Second World War being the biggest war and the biggest technological advances. We're still using a lot like GPS and sonar and radar and just so even Wi-Fi, computers all came from that same, maybe not being used in the war, but from the investment, the time and the focus that was given. Now, my question is, why can't we take even a fraction of that level of like resources and focus and excitement and ingenuity and do it for peace instead of for war? Because we have a huge problem here, but what we can do is not only solve the problem, we can have a better future, a better earth than we even have now. So we can actually go further than what we have now. Instead of just coming back to where we were, we can have a better life, a better future for everybody, if we just kind of get together and work it out together. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. I've given you a few of my ideas. What can you do? Where are you involved? You can answer it now or not, as you like. But I just want you to think about this. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be a world beater. You don't have to be, you don't have to be the one person to change everything. But what is within your control? Can you write a letter? Can you just bring something or other up in an organization that you're involved in? Within your family, can you make a change? What is possible? Because I would argue that there is a huge amount of power, even just in this Zoom room right now, but in general, amongst our communities and in the world in general. So with that, I would like to thank you for sticking with me for plastics. And are there any questions? Lost my.
That was awesome. If you all have questions, you can type them in the chat box, or if you'd prefer, you can use the raise your hand feature, and we can, Jane can call on you, and then you can like turn your microphone and camera on and chat a little bit. So let's see what we're wondering about.
Oh, I'm just opening my chat window now. There's lots of, there's so much awesome stuff here. Sorry, I get so distracted. I'm an intern for an ocean organization where we do beach cleanups. Once COVID kind of slows down, we're going to start that again. That's wonderful. Yeah, I shouldn't mention as well, you all need to stay safe. That's the first thing you need to do. Are paper products lined with plastic? A lot of them are. Look, not all of them. So for example, if I take a book, right, this is just straight up paper. I actually think the ink probably does have some plastic in it, but the earth will cope with that level. But something like this. So any kind of like printing, you can feel it almost, I don't want to peel it off, but you know how like books kind of start to peel at one end? It's a plastic coating. And coffee cups, certainly. That doesn't mean there aren't coffee cups that are majority paper and can still be recycled. Like like milk cartons. I don't know if you guys still get milk cartons in the United States, but cartons that have, like, cardboard can't keep liquid in. Fact, right? You can't keep milk in with cardboard. So you need a liner. Those things can still be recycled. The recycling facilities, recycling is expensive, like super expensive to build and to do and to staff, and like even just the energy, the electricity that goes into recycling, especially cans like aluminium. Oh, unbelievable. So there are places that can do like coffee cups, paper coffee cups, but you get a lower quality of recycled paper from it. So yeah, definitely the preference is to have a reusable cup if you can in that case. Yeah, ask your local government. What do you guys call them? Councils, municipalities, whatever. Ask them. Your mayor, just call them. Like you and your family voted for them, and you and your family pay for them. Ask them. You don't have to demand stuff before you just find out. And if they don't have an answer, that's an answer in and of itself. So don't feel as though you can't ask us a kind of tough question of people who seem busy and important. Yeah. Sorry, rant again. What do we got? I've been to a beach like this. Oh, we're talking about Australia. Yeah. Tell Broadreach to do a East Coast Australia adventure in the future. So hard to see this in birds because it's usually very difficult to catch and release the animal. Yeah, it is. Cool. Do we have any other? I want to go to Newcastle. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Are there any other questions about plastic, or does anybody want to share any ideas they have, or like what is your network? What do you do? What are you interested in? Oh man. What has been the biggest challenge you have faced throughout your career in either dealing with plastics specifically or just in general? It's ongoing. It's ongoing. Due to COVID, I've just got like kind of a crummy job now, like to pay the bills, just working in retail. There's just so much plastic. There's so much plastic just everywhere all the time. Even things like carry bags, the really lightweight ones that you don't have to pay for. In Australia, we had been pushing for a legislative change so that it was illegal to just give away free, like lightweight, crummy shopping bags because people just get them because they're free. And then they throw them away immediately. And they're lightweight, so they blow, and they're a disaster. It didn't happen. It's like a little mini lesson in and of itself. Not that I did it, but it didn't happen with the government. The government just didn't have the leadership to do it. So we have not a monopoly, but a very strong, two big companies, two big supermarkets have most of the supermarket share across the whole country. And that's Coles and Woolworths. I guess it's a little bit like, let's say, Walmart and, I don't know, Safeway. I know they're different all across America. You guys don't have quite the same thing. We've got two, and they own everything. And they decided, well, one did first, and then like 3 days later, the other one did as well. They decided they weren't going to give away free lightweight plastic bags anymore. They still have plastic bags, but they cost money, and they're kind of like heavy and durable, so you can reuse them. And that was huge. Like to do that without the government making them as well, because they're such big retailers, everybody else had to do it to keep up as well. So I currently am actually working at a place, I've only just started a couple of weeks ago, and we're still giving away these crummy little plastic bags. So what do? The answer is I need to talk to my boss or maybe just go straight over her head in case she says no and then it's too late. But you have to know that you're kind of like taking a little bit of a risk. So I struggle with this all the time. There's plastic everywhere. And then I think, okay, well, I've got this old thing and I don't want it anymore and it's not valuable and it's broken and I can't give it away. And can I throw it away? What do I do? Like it's hard to sort of make the decision to recycle something appropriately, even when I'm mediumly sure that it is being recycled appropriately. And there's just garbage everywhere. It's hard to kind of keep the motivation, but I'm getting better. I grew up in a household where just throwing things out was never acceptable, or just buying something disposable was never acceptable. It's just not the kind of household I grew up in. I guess to some extent it comes from like, my mum was a little bit older when she had me, and her mum was a little bit older when she had her. So my grandparents grew up during the Depression. And I guess to some extent it comes from that. But yeah, I'm always struggling with it. My biggest success is I have made differences sometimes, but they've been small. And I guess my biggest challenge is that I need to remind myself that you can never stop trying to do that. Has there been any success with those bacteria that eat plastic? I'm glad somebody asked that. I don't know enough about it. It sounds fascinating. Bacteria are like so interesting everywhere. If you think we rely on plastic, we rely on bacteria way more. They are everywhere, on everything, in everything, through everything, including you. I know that sounds like gross because we think of bacteria as being like disease. But they are disease, but they're everything else as well. So there are like bacteria that like let you absorb the nutrients when you eat. If we didn't have bacteria, you'd be like skinny and unwell, or probably dead. I think we need them for everything. There are bacteria that like live in sulfuric acid ponds, in Yellowstone, in like literally boiling like sulfuric acid. There are bacteria in Antarctica that can actually like break the nitrogen bonds from the air. So they like eat air. And apparently there are some bacteria that eat plastic. I think there would have to be, because bacteria is so interesting. There would have to be ways that they can break that down. I'm terrified about the concept of like plastic eating bacteria, because there are still plastics we need. Like catheters. I want catheters to be single use, you know, like there are things that we need to be like single use and we need to like not break down. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that's going, and I hope it's going really well. So if anybody out there wants to study microbiology, that could be maybe a project you could do for school. Or if anybody out there is interested in like engineering or something like that, maybe you could do a project on like bioplastics. Yeah, here we go. What are some changes you made in your personal life that have helped you reduce your personal plastic consumption? Definitely reusable items, definitely. To the point where like I almost like can't buy bottled water even if I'm thirsty. Like I'll just be thirsty, which is not good for you either. But bottled water is the worst because obviously it's all the water problem. Sorry, it's all the plastic problem. But just every step along the way of bottled water is just so bad for everybody involved. Especially because we live in countries where the tap water is actually better for you than, well, I assume in most parts of the United States, is actually better for you than bottled water. Yeah, I don't know. I guess changes is being more aware and kind of giving myself a pep talk to like have those conversations with companies that I work for. Broadreach not being one of them. One of the reasons I love Broadreach so much is like there's such a great mentality about like if we're going to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. But I work for lots of other companies that have big bosses and big publicly traded companies up above them, and they don't always see the value, I suppose. So yeah, one of the big changes I have is like saying what I think to people who are important, but also potentially could fire me. And so far, it's been good. Yeah, I've got what? What was what exclamation mark? What was that about? Oh, bacteria that eat air. I know, it's amazing. It's so amazing. There's bacteria in Antarctica, right? There are these under ice lakes, right? They're like 2 miles under ice, and they're not connected to anything else. And they drill down through this ice in like blackness, just the blackness of nothing. And there's this little lens of water, and they think what it is the there's like volcanoes at the bottom, and they're kind of like keeping the water at the bottom uniced, thawed, keeping it water basically. But Antarctica's ice sheet has been there for a few million years, or several million years now. But these lakes, under ice lakes, have been there for at least a million years, totally unconnected. They drilled down there and they found bacteria, totally just living their life, totally unconnected from everything else for millions of years. They even found symbionts. Now, a symbiont is something that's in like a symbiotic relationship with something else. So, for example, all like the bugs you have in your tummy, those are all symbionts, and they can only live there. That's the only thing they do. And if you find like a human gut symbiont, you know that it's come from a human gut. So they've found some like symbionts, which kind of suggests that there are like more complex life forms down there. I don't think there could possibly be anything like fish or anything. I just don't think that could be possible. I don't know. But they've found some pretty, yeah, Antarctica is amazing. Bacteria are amazing. What sparked your interest and passion for the career field you are in? I don't know. It's so interesting. I don't know. I went to university not knowing what I was going to do. I hadn't even done high school biology when I went to university. And we have a slightly different system than you guys do. But I started doing physics and maths and geology, science. I was always going to do science, but I didn't know what. And then in second year, there was a course called Applied Ecology. And part of it was like going to this field station the university had by the coast. Like, so some of those pictures I showed you. I went to Sydney, so it was like kind of closer to home for me for going by the coast. And you basically just like counted plants and like looked for koalas and, you know, did some like wallaby trapping and things. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. I didn't have the prerequisite for it. You had to do biology, and I hadn't even done it in high school, let alone first year. So I went and talked to the lecturer and asked if I could do it anyway. And she said, well, yes, but you'll have to do the prereq. So I did first year biology and this second one at the same time. And she said, well, if you fail, it's, you know, your problem. Anyway, I did that. And now I have 3 biology degrees and I'm about to start my PhD. It's just so interesting. I just took one thing that I liked, and then that led on to the next thing, and then that led on to the next thing. And And then I found out that Broadreach was the thing, and I like hassled them until they gave me a job. And yeah. Is being vegan help the environment? Yes, it can. It can be hugely important. It depends on what your goal is. So I need to tell you, I'm a huge hypocrite. I do eat meat. I'm not just not a vegan, I'm not a vegetarian. However, you definitely have the upper hand when it comes to a lot of issues. Certainly, you need to be very careful with fish. If we're talking about plastics and pollution and toxins, you need to be very careful about fish for your own health. I would like to send you to the MSC, which is the Marine Sustainability Council, Marine Stewardship Council, MSC, and also the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Both of those organizations are really useful when it comes to understanding sustainable seafood, because there's so many problems in seafood. Plastic is like one. There are many problems. Certainly in terms of carbon output, in terms of climate change, yes, eating further down the food chain. So eating less meat in general, certainly less red meat, and less dairy, less eggs, kind of in that order. I'm not an expert on this. Those things are definitely better for everybody. So if we ate more vegetables and less meat, that would be better for everybody. Then there's also, there are issues around soy. Soy has a lot of problems environmentally. It doesn't mean they can't be overcome. It doesn't mean that it's worse than beef. But I guess the thing is, just be aware that like anything black and white, like I eat this and I only eat this because this is good and this is bad. Unfortunately, well, depending on how you look at it, either unfortunately or fortunately, the earth is like infinitely complex, which means that trying to keep up with this stuff is really hard. I think if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, or even just trying to lower your intake of red meat and, you know, high order fishes, or so like predatory fishes like salmon, and which is my favorite. Oh, salmon, I love it. But you just can't eat it every day. You just can't eat it every day. And if you think about your grandparents or even their parents, like they would have had it maybe once a month, once a year if they were lucky. You know, we live so, like, we're so wealthy now. The amount of meat that we eat, the amount of like sort of predators that we eat now, and just the quality of food we eat now is probably a little bit unreasonable as well. But yes, the short answer is yes, being a vegan is definitely very helpful. The longer answer is yes, but, you know, just be aware of like what you're eating, and find those people like the MSC, you know, like the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And then there are a range of other organizations that take huge amounts of information and distill it down into like, you know, a red, yellow, green kind of categorization, or this is certified sustainable or this isn't. And demand those things from your government as well. Demand that your government gets involved in terms of allowing things or not allowing things, and having like easy to understand packaging and marketing. Great to know. I'm a vegan and I just wondered what other people think about it. I didn't know that soy wasn't very good. It's not that it's not good. It's just that there are huge issues with soy, in that there's lots of places where soy is grown where native forest and natural ecosystems are completely raised for soy monoculture. And that is hugely damaging for a whole range of reasons. It doesn't mean it's all soy. It doesn't mean it's just something to be aware of. Get out there and look it up. And yeah, knowledge is power. And I think the fact, number one, that you're trying, and number two, that you're willing to change your behavior for something better. That is, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's like what we all need to be doing, and I need to do better. Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, check back through, Jane, and see if I missed any questions. But we're just about out of time, so I was going to tell everybody that I'm about to throw my email address in the chat box. If you think of anything else that you want me to pass along to Jane, I'm more than happy to do that. She said she'll answer some questions for us as we sleep on it. It's our nighttime over here in the U.S. But it's Jane's beginning of the day, so maybe she'll even get to us a little later.
Yeah, it's lunchtime. It's lunchtime. It's my aunt's birthday, so I got to rush off and try not to talk about plastic all through lunch.
Yeah, you probably would be likely to. Yeah, so if I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat. If you think of anything else, everybody, thanks for coming, and you can send your questions my way.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for letting me go on. As you can see, I tend to get on a bit of a roll. So thanks for letting me kind of chat. I heard something.
I raised my hand.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry. I was
Yeah.
not.
Sorry. It's okay. It's okay. I'm just wondering who is here as vegan and who is not. I am
Good
vegan.
question.
Oh, that's a good question. Everybody can respond in the chat and let George know what they're thinking. But that sounds great. And I'm Virginia. So if you have any questions, send them my way. Jane, thank you so much
Oh,
for
my
coming. We
pleasure.
loved having you. Hopefully we'll have you back to talk about killer
Oh,
whales in Australia sometime.
oh my gosh. I'm really going to have to be careful about talking too much about that one. Yeah, they're so interesting. Just Google it. Google killer whales Australia.
You'll be better.
Google killer whales Eden. Eden. You're welcome.
EDEN.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's so interesting.
Can't wait.
Yay.
All right. Thanks, Jane. Have a great afternoon. And everybody else have a great night. Thanks for being here.
Bye. Bye, guys.